You're here because you want to understand addiction right. Substance abuse. It's something that touches so many lives, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we're doing a deep dive today into an article called Addiction and Substance Abuse, Identification, Causes, and Solutions, to really equip you with the knowledge you're seeking.
Right.
So how can you spot the signs, what causes it in the first place, and most importantly, what are the paths to recovery?
I think what's most fascinating about this whole thing is that recovery is possible. It's a journey, though. It's not a destination.
Yeah,
And taking that first step towards understanding is really crucial.
absolutely. Okay, so the article dives right into identification. And I have to admit, when I first started reading, I thought, oh, this will be easy. Just look for X, Y, and Z. But it's way more complex than that, right?
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's rarely black and white. And one of the most important things to remember is that addiction is not a character flaw.
Right.
It's a complex medical condition, and we need to move beyond those harmful stereotypes.
Absolutely. So if it's not a simple checklist, what are some of the signs that someone might notice in themselves or a loved one? What should we be looking for?
Let's imagine you're concerned about a friend.
Okay.
You might notice subtle changes in their physical appearance.
Okay.
Maybe they've lost or gained weight, they look tired all the time, or they seem to be getting sick more often.
So these are things you might easily miss, right? Or attribute to just something else like stress or busy schedule. What about behavioral changes?
This is where it can get really tricky. You might notice increased secrecy. They're always on their phone. They
Right.
disappear for periods of time, or they become withdrawn. They might start neglecting their responsibilities at work or at home.
Okay.
Bills might pile up, their performance slips, or they pull away from social gatherings.
Wow. I can see how these behaviors could easily be mistaken for something else, like depression or just going through a rough patch.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are the emotional signs. Extreme mood swings, irritability, defensiveness. Again, these could be attributed to any number of things.
So how do we differentiate between typical ups and downs and something more serious? What's the defining factor here?
The hallmark of addiction is cravings and loss of control. And this is where the brain science gets really interesting.
You know, I love the brain science. Tell me more.
Imagine dopamine, that's that feel-good chemical,
Yeah.
flooding your brain 10 times more powerfully than natural rewards. That's the hijacking power of substances.
Wow.
They latch onto the brain's reward system, creating this intense surge of pleasure. Over time, the brain starts craving that intense high, and that's when you see that loss of control.
So it's not just about willpower. It's like the brain's wiring gets reprogrammed.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
then, of course, there's tolerance and dependence. The more the brain gets used to that flood of dopamine, the less sensitive it becomes. So people need more and more of the substance just to get the same effect. And when they try to stop,
The experience withdrawal.
exactly. And the withdrawal symptoms can be incredibly unpleasant, both physically and psychologically, which makes it even harder to quit.
So we're talking about a domino effect here. It starts with these subtle changes, and then it impacts every area of someone's life.
Absolutely. Think about it. If someone's constantly battling cravings and withdrawal, how can they focus on work? How can they be a present parent or partner? It impacts relationships, finances, mental health, everything.
It's heart-wrenching to think about the ripple effects. So this brings us to the big question. What makes someone vulnerable to this hijacking in the first place? The article emphasizes that it's rarely just one thing.
Right. It's a perfect storm of biological, psychological, and environmental factors.
Okay, let's unpack those. What about the biological factors? Genetics seem to play a role, but how big of a role?
Well, did you know that genetic factors account for 40–60% of an individual's vulnerability to addiction?
Wow, that's huge.
That's huge. So having a family history of addiction significantly increases the risk.
So genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. That's a powerful analogy.
It is. It really highlights that interplay of nature and nurture. But it's important to note that genetics don't seal your fate.
Right?
Just because a parent struggled with addiction doesn't mean you're destined to follow the same path.
Right.
It's about understanding your predisposition and making informed choices.
I think that's a really important point, especially for anyone listening who might be feeling scared or hopeless right now.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Uh-huh.
And understanding these biological factors can help us move from fear to proactive action.
I love that.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got the genetic predisposition. What else is happening in the brain? The article mentions brain chemistry. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, we talked about dopamine, but there's a whole symphony of neurotransmitters involved. Different substances affect the brain in different ways, but ultimately, they all disrupt that delicate balance, leading to those powerful cravings and dependence.
So it's not just about pleasure, it's about the brain getting hooked on these unnatural chemical surges.
Yeah, exactly. It craves that quick fix, that immediate hit of dopamine, and it starts to rely on the substance to function.
Wow. And then there's the issue of chronic pain or illness.
Yeah.
How does that fit into the picture?
This is a huge factor, especially with the opioid crisis. Think about it. You're suffering from chronic pain, and suddenly there's this medication that takes the pain away.
Well, that's a miracle.
Right. But the problem is, those medications also affect the brain's reward system. People start taking painkillers for a legitimate medical reason, and before they know it, they're physically dependent.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So we've got genetics, brain chemistry, and chronic pain all playing a role.
Mm-hmm.
But addiction isn't just physical, right? Our minds play a huge role, too. Let's delve into those psychological tries. What does the article say about stress and trauma?
This is where things get really nuanced. Imagine your brain is like a finely tuned instrument. When you experience chronic stress, anxiety, or the aftermath of a traumatic event, that instrument gets thrown out of whack. It's in a state of hyperarousal. Substances, in a way, offer a temporary escape from that chaos. They numb the pain, quiet the noise.
So it's a form of self-medication, a way to cope with overwhelming emotions.
Precisely. And this often ties into mental health disorders. The article mentions that addiction and conditions like depression or anxiety frequently go hand in hand.
That makes sense. If you're already struggling with mental health challenges, it's easy to see how substances could offer a tempting, albeit temporary, escape.
Yeah. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Does the mental health disorder lead to substance abuse or vice versa? It's often impossible to say for sure.
Right.
But the important thing is to address both conditions simultaneously.
So it's not just about treating the addiction, it's about treating the whole person.
Exactly. And this brings us to another psychological factor: low self-esteem.
Oh, this is something I think so many people can relate to, regardless of whether they struggle with addiction. That feeling of not being good enough, of constantly seeking validation.
Absolutely. If you're struggling with low self-esteem, substances can seem like a solution. They can provide a temporary boost of confidence, a way to numb those painful feelings of inadequacy.
But of course, it's a false sense of confidence, a fleeting escape that ultimately makes those feelings worse. It's a vicious cycle. So we've covered the biological and psychological factors, the internal forces that make someone vulnerable to addiction. But the article also talks about environmental influences, right?
Yeah.
These external pressures that can push someone towards substance use. What are some of those factors?
Well, peer pressure is an obvious one, but it's not always as straightforward as someone explicitly pressuring you to use drugs or alcohol.
Right.
It's more about the subtle social norms that surround us.
You mean like everyone's doing it, so it must be okay?
Exactly. Think about college campuses, certain social circles, even workplaces. If everyone in your environment is drinking heavily, it becomes normalized, even expected.
It's about fitting in, feeling like you belong.
Yeah.
It's that primal human need for connection.
Precisely. And then there's the issue of accessibility. If drugs and alcohol are readily available, the risk of abuse obviously increases.
Like they say, you can't use what you can't get. But it's more than just physical access, right? It's about the messages we're bombarded with every day.
Absolutely. Think about advertising, pop culture, even the way we often glamorized, normalized, even romanticized.
So it's not just about individual choices, it's about the systems that make those choices easier or harder.
Precisely. And finally, we have to talk about the elephant in the room: the unstable home environment.
Yeah.
This one's a bit heavier, but it's crucial to understand how early childhood experiences can shape someone's vulnerability to addiction.
I think this is a really important point because it moves us away from blame and judgment and toward a deeper understanding of the complex factors at play.
Exactly. Childhood experiences, especially trauma and neglect, can have a profound impact on brain development. And growing up with a parent struggling with addiction increases a child's risk by 8 times.
Wow.
It's like the foundation for everything that comes after.
So we're not just talking about genetics here. We're talking about the emotional and psychological environment a child grows up in that shapes their beliefs, their coping mechanisms, their entire worldview.
Precisely. It's not about blaming parents or caregivers, but understanding that these early experiences leave a lasting imprint.
So we've got this complex web of factors, all intertwined. It can feel overwhelming, like this unsolvable puzzle. But that's where the article really shines, because it doesn't just leave us hanging with this doom and gloom. It dives into solutions, and that's where I think the real hope lies.
And that's what we'll explore after a quick break.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed when you start to understand, like, the sheer complexity of addiction. But the good news is there's so much we can do.
That's what I'm so excited to dig into. I was starting to feel a bit heavy after that last segment. But the article doesn't leave us hanging. It goes on to explore solutions, and that's where things get really hopeful.
Absolutely. And the key here is understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
What works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding the right combination of approaches tailored to the individual.
Okay. So it's not a magic formula. It's more like a toolbox filled with different options.
I love that analogy. Yeah.
Nice.
It's about empowering people with choices and finding what resonates with their unique needs and circumstances.
So let's open up that toolbox. What are some of the solutions the article highlights? It starts with professional treatment, right?
Right. And for many people, the first step is detox.
Okay.
This is about safely managing those intense withdrawal symptoms in a supportive medical setting. It's not about going cold turkey on your own, which can be dangerous and, frankly, terrifying.
So detox provides that essential safety net, that initial bridge to recovery.
Exactly. It's about stabilizing the body and mind, giving people the space to start healing. And from there, many people transition to rehab centers.
Okay.
These can be inpatient, where you live at the facility, or outpatient, where you attend therapy and counseling sessions while living at home.
I've heard of those, but honestly, I don't really understand the difference. What are the advantages of each approach?
Inpatient rehab provides that immersive, structured environment that can be so beneficial in early recovery. It removes distractions and temptations, allowing you to fully focus on healing. Outpatient rehab offers more flexibility.
Right.
For people who can't or don't want to leave their work or family responsibilities, it's about finding the right level of support for each individual.
So rehab is about providing that intensive support system, that structured environment to help people break free from addiction.
Precisely. And within rehab, there's also medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. This involves using medications to help manage cravings and withdrawal symptoms, making it easier to focus on therapy and long-term recovery.
Honestly, I always thought of MAT as kind of a crutch, like it wasn't real recovery. But the article challenges that perception.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigma around MAT, but it's so important to understand the science behind it. These medications, like buprenorphine or methadone, they help stabilize brain chemistry, making it easier to manage cravings and focus on therapy.
So it's not about replacing one substance with another. It's about using medication as a tool to support the recovery process.
Exactly. It's like giving someone a life raft while they're learning to swim. It provides that crucial support while they're developing the skills and strength they need to stay afloat on their own.
It's such a powerful image. It's not about taking the easy way out. It's about providing the necessary support to make lasting change possible.
Precisely. And alongside professional treatment, building a strong support network is crucial.
Yeah.
This includes family and friends, but it can also mean support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and individual or group counseling.
You know, I've heard of AA and NA, but I always imagine them as kind of these intense, maybe even judgmental environments. Is that accurate?
There are a lot of misconceptions about these groups, but at their core, they're based on the power of shared experience. People in recovery supporting each other, sharing their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. It's about knowing you're not alone in this journey.
That sense of community and connection must be so powerful, especially when you're feeling isolated and ashamed.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sense of belonging, that tribe of people who understand what you're going through. And counseling provides that safe, confidential space to explore the underlying emotional issues that often contribute to addiction.
So it's about addressing the root causes, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. It's about uncovering those deep-seated wounds, those patterns of thought and behavior that may be driving the addiction. It's a journey of self-discovery and healing.
That sounds incredibly challenging, but also incredibly empowering to finally understand yourself on that deeper level.
It is. And it's a continuous journey. Recovery isn't just about stopping the substance use. It's about addressing those underlying issues and building a fulfilling life that doesn't revolve around addiction.
So how do people do that? What does that fulfilling life actually look like?
This is where we move into the realm of healthy coping mechanisms. We talked about medication as a tool to manage cravings and withdrawal, but ultimately, recovery is about finding sustainable, healthy ways to cope with life's challenges.
I'm a big believer in this.
Yeah.
I find that yoga helps me manage stress and stay grounded. It's like a moving meditation that calms my mind and strengthens my body. What about you? What helps you stay centered and balanced?
For me, it's long walks in nature. There's something about being surrounded by trees and fresh air that just clears my head and helps me reconnect with myself. It's a simple practice, but incredibly powerful.
I love that. And the article also talks about the importance of hobbies and interests, things that bring you joy, spark your creativity, and help you rediscover who you are outside of addiction.
This is so important. It's about finding those activities that light you up, that make you feel alive and engaged. Maybe it's painting, playing music, writing, gardening, whatever speaks to your soul.
It's about finding your passion, your purpose, and rebuilding your life around that.
Exactly. And then there's routine building, which might sound boring, but it's actually really powerful.
Okay. I'll admit, when I read that part, I thought, routine. That sounds a bit restrictive, but I'm starting to see the value in it.
Especially early in recovery, when life can feel chaotic and overwhelming. Having a structured routine provides a sense of stability and predictability. It helps you stay on track, make healthy choices, and avoid those triggers that can lead to relapse.
So it's not about being rigid or inflexible. It's about creating that solid foundation, that structure that supports your recovery.
Precisely. And then we move beyond the individual level to broader solutions. Education and awareness are so crucial in changing the conversation around addiction.
Right. The article talks about community programs that educate people about the risks of substance abuse and the importance of early intervention, preventing addiction before it even starts.
This is where we can really shift the paradigm. By reaching young people, by challenging those harmful stereotypes, by creating a more supportive and understanding environment.
And that includes things like school curriculums that address addiction in an honest, age-appropriate way.
Absolutely. We need to start having these conversations early, equipping young people with the knowledge and skills they need to make informed choices. And it's not just about schools. Workplaces play a crucial role too.
Right. The article mentions workplace policies that support employees who are struggling with addiction, providing resources and accommodations.
Did you know that a surprisingly high percentage of workplaces offer employee assistance programs, or EAPs? These programs provide confidential counseling and support for a range of issues, including addiction.
That's fantastic. I had no idea.
Right.
So we're talking about a multi-pronged approach here. Prevention, treatment, support, education. It's about tackling this issue from all angles.
Exactly. And finally, we have to address the underlying causes of addiction. We talked about this earlier with mental health disorders, but it goes even deeper than that.
The article mentions dual diagnosis treatment, which is treating addiction alongside any co-occurring mental health issues. What does that look like in practice?
It's about recognizing that addiction is often a symptom of something deeper. Trauma, depression, anxiety, unresolved grief, the list goes on. Dual diagnosis treatment addresses both the addiction and the underlying mental health condition simultaneously.
So it's not about treating two separate issues. It's about understanding the interconnectedness of mind and body.
Exactly. And this might involve therapies like EMDR or CBT, which can be incredibly effective in helping people process past trauma and develop healthier coping mechanisms.
It's about rewiring the brain, so to speak, undoing those negative patterns and creating new, healthy pathways.
Precisely. And then there are the basic lifestyle changes that often get overlooked. Good nutrition, exercise, sleep.
Right.
These things might seem simple, but they have a profound impact on both physical and mental health.
It's like creating that foundation of well-being, that solid ground from which recovery can flourish.
Exactly. And that's what recovery is all about. It's a journey of healing, of growth, of rediscovering yourself. It's about building a life worth living.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from identification to causes to solutions. It's clear that addiction is a complex issue, but it's also clear that there's hope. There are so many paths to recovery, so many tools and resources available.
Absolutely, and that's the message I want to leave your listeners with. No matter how dark things may seem, there is always hope. Recovery is possible.
That's so reassuring to hear, especially after, delving into all the complexities of addiction. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but knowing that recovery is possible gives me so much hope.
And that's the message we want to spread. There's such a pervasive sense of hopelessness that surrounds addiction, and it's fueled by stigma, misinformation, and fear. But the truth is, people recover every single day. You know, they rebuild their lives, they rediscover their passions, they find joy and purpose again.
That's so inspiring to hear. But it makes me wonder, what can WE do to help make those stories of recovery more common? How can we contribute to, like, a more supportive and understanding environment for those who are struggling with addiction?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer, but I think it starts with education.
Yeah.
The more we understand addiction, the better equipped we are to challenge those harmful stereotypes and offer compassionate support.
Right. Knowledge is power. But sometimes it feels like there's so much conflicting information out there. Like, where do we even begin?
Well, I always encourage people to start with reputable sources. There are incredible organizations like the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NID, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSS. They provide evidence-based information about addiction, treatment, and recovery.
So we need to be discerning consumers of information, making sure we're getting our facts straight.
Absolutely. And it's not just about absorbing information. It's about changing the way we talk about addiction. Instead of using stigmatizing terms like addict or junkie, let's talk about people with substance use disorder.
It's about recognizing the personhood of those who are struggling, not reducing them to their addiction.
Exactly. And it's about advocating for policies that support prevention, treatment, and recovery. We need to increase funding for mental health and addiction services, make treatment more accessible and affordable, and expand access to harm reduction programs.
So it's about creating a system of care that supports people throughout their entire recovery journey.
Precisely. And that includes addressing the social determinants of health, like poverty, homelessness, and lack of access to education and employment opportunities that can contribute to addiction.
It's about recognizing that addiction is not just an individual issue, it's a societal issue that requires a multifaceted approach.
Exactly. And, beyond the policy level, what can we do in our own lives, in our own communities?
That's what I'm really grappling with. It feels overwhelming. Like, what can I, one person, possibly do to make a difference?
Well, I believe that small acts of kindness and understanding can have a ripple effect. Start by having open and honest conversations about addiction with your family and friends. Challenge the myths and misconceptions that perpetuate stigma.
Don't be afraid to talk about it.
Exactly. And if you know someone who's struggling, offer your support without judgment. Listen with an open heart. Let them know they're not alone, and help them find resources. Sometimes just being there for someone can make all the difference.
It's about creating that safe space, that sense of belonging we talked about earlier.
Precisely. And remember, recovery is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, setbacks and triumphs, but with the right support and resources, people can and do recover.
And every step toward recovery, no matter how small, is a victory.
Absolutely. So let's all commit to being a part of the solution. Let's challenge stigma, advocate for change, and create a world where people feel empowered to seek help without shame or judgment. A world where recovery is celebrated, not condemned.
That's a beautiful vision, and it's a vision we can all work towards. One conversation, one act of kindness at a time. And on that note of hope and possibility, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, insightful, and perhaps even inspiring. Remember, you're not alone, and there is always hope.